You're listening to the new media. You're listening to Mitchell Talks. Learn more at mitchelltalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at Mitchell Talks.
In this episode of Forgotten Voices, you'll meet Jan Langbein, the CEO of Genesis Women's Shelter in Dallas, Texas. For over 2 decades, Jan Langbein has led national efforts to end violence against women and children. Since being appointed by the President of the United States to serve as Senior Policy Advisor on Violence Against Women, she has become a national spokesperson on the scourge of violence that now affects 1 in 3 people. Jan is a recognized expert, and she testifies as an expert in court cases and trains law enforcement and prosecutors to enhance their efforts to end violence against women and children. Genesis also serves a national need. They're the host of the annual Conference on Crimes Against Women, which provides training to law enforcement, prosecution, social work, victims advocacy, therapy, probation, parole, campus safety, and medicine for professionals and volunteers who work directly with victims of crime from all across the United States. When we come back, you'll meet the great Jan Langbein. But first, a message from our friends at Marcy's Law, yes, on State Question 794.
Every day, new individuals and families are impacted by a range of crime, from white-collar to violence. Hello, my name is Kim Moyer, and I'm the State Director of Marcy's Law for Oklahoma, State Question 794. A lot of these families find out the hard way that our criminal justice system is set up to protect the rights of the accused criminal, not the rights of the victim. Many of them feel abandoned or ignored. Marcy's Law for Oklahoma, State Question 794, provides constitutional protections to victims and their families and ensures that they have a voice in the criminal justice system. You can vote to support victims of crime by voting yes on State Question 794. To share your story or learn more about State Question 794, visit ok.marcyslaw.us. This message is authorized and paid for by Marcy's Law for Oklahoma, State Question 794.
Of course, Scott, thank you so much. Genesis Women's Shelter and Support for 38 years has been providing safety, shelter, counseling, information, and referral for women and children who are victims of domestic violence. We began with a shelter with 7 beds, and in the last 38 years, we have grown to a full-service response with shelter, transitional housing, childcare, preschool, legal services on site. We also know that a large portion of the battered population will never seek shelter, and so we actually have our non-residential office where from 9 in the morning till 9 at night, in English and in Spanish, we provide the same services for women who do not need a place to sleep. Either they haven't left or they've left and they have other residential resources. So basically what Genesis has done over the years is just try to remove any roadblock that can mean defeat for a woman who is trying to flee domestic violence. We know, however, that remediating the after effect is not nearly enough, that we want to raise the awareness about, Genesis wants to raise the awareness about domestic violence, its impact, its effects, and try to prevent these crimes from happening. Case in point, one of our biggest programs is the National Conference on Crimes Against Women.
In 2018, what are the lessons the top shelf lessons for you that you want to share with people about domestic violence?
I think it's a real different time in the lives of this country. The court of public opinion has now said #MeToo. It has now, a year ago, if you had asked me that question, I would have said, well, about probably same old. But now we've had Harvey Weinstein, and we've had, Matt Lauer, and we've had these Kevin Spacey, and people who have stepped up, and they're saying, you know what, I was treated inappropriately as well, and I'm not gonna take it anymore, basically. But what's interesting, people think this sexual harassment phenomenon, if you want to call it that, is unique. Well, it's not. Whether it's sexual harassment or sexual assault or strangulation or domestic violence or trafficking, they're all choices of weapons in the arsenal of a perpetrator of violence.
Domestic violence and mass shootings. I'm seeing a lot of presentations, and you talked to the opening session this morning, the ties between those two. Tell us what you know now.
Absolutely. So if you look at the mass shooters over the last several years, whether it was Orlando, Florida, Boston Marathon bomber, Sutherland Springs, Texas, Parkland, Florida. If you look at these individual episodes, as tragic as they are, the one common thread, even Dallas, for example, Dallas had a sniper hide out on top of a building and gun down law enforcement officials as they were trying to keep the peace with a rally about a year and a half ago. They're all different shapes and sizes. They come from different ethnicities and different backgrounds. The one common thread, however, among all of these mass shooters is that there has been a history of violence against women. The Sutherland Springs shooting that happened in South Texas here, First Baptist Church on a Sunday morning, is where the mom and his mother-in-law and ex-wife were there every Sunday. It was like any other Sunday, only they didn't go to church that day. And unfortunately, all those who did suffered the consequence. So we can't think of these as isolated. We know that there is a lethal link between mass shooters and domestic violence. If we could stop it at domestic violence, if we could look at people who should never, by law, never have access to guns. Maybe we could stop some of these horrific school shootings and shootings within our communities.
Why do you think the media focuses on the gun aspect and not this sort of thing? Is it just that people like me in the media just are ignorant of what's going on, and it's a more difficult story to cover than just take away guns sort of thing?
Well, I think the whole gun conversation is a real emotional thing. You know, I'm happy to talk about it, but I get a lot of folks who give me a lot of pushback on it. You know, what about safe gun ownership? What about gun control? That's not what I'm talking about here. In the United States, there is federal law that prohibits people convicted of misdemeanor or felony domestic violence charges from ever having a gun ever again. And yet the problem is we don't take them up because we don't know how to take them up. We don't know where to store them. We don't know how to ask for them. There is a judge that I was talking to not long ago, and he said, you know, I ask every single person who comes through my courtroom, do you have guns? And nobody says yes. And I said, well, by the mere fact that they're there, you know they're already criminals and liars, right? So I don't know why you're even wasting your breath on the ad. We've got to figure out a way that we can enforce state and federal laws that say if you are subject to a protective order, you cannot have, buy, borrow, house, store guns, and yet we don't take it the next step. But again, I think it's a very emotional conversation. People are so afraid they're going to have their amendment rights taken away, which is just not the case. This isn't about responsible gun ownership. This is about irresponsible gun ownership and access. The speaker that we heard this morning talked about people who you can't rehabilitate because they've never been habilitated. And I was thinking in terms of with regards to gun ownership, those aren't the people you want having guns, and that's not a roadblock to my American civil rights. This is good practice, and unfortunately, we don't want to have these kinds of conversations.
What sort of advocacy should people be doing with this conversation? It's against the law for them to have them, but it sounded to me like there was some part of the conversation, part of the narrative is judges aren't doing their jobs in many cases.
Well, it's not judges. Judges have in Texas, for example, there's no gun registration. So if he says, I don't have guns, and the police report noted that it wasn't, the crime that was committed was not with a gun, and he looks at the judge looks at the victim and says, does he have guns? And the perpetrator looks at the victim and gives that evil eye, knowing you better not tell anything or you're going to pay the price later. So there's no way for judges. I don't think they're just disregarding it. I think they don't know what to do. And unfortunately, there aren't protocols in place because another thing is that each community is so different. That, our county judges here in Dallas operate real differently from maybe Harris County or Travis County with regards to the process process of the process. In other words, do you have a bond hearing first? Do you have a pretrial meeting? Is it on record? And if it's not on record, then asking about guns has to be on record, and so on and so for it to be enforceable. So on and so forth. It's just hard at the state level. But Scott, your question was, what should we be doing? I'll be in Austin next January and February talking about it to my elected officials. I hope you'll be in your state capital talking about it. This is protecting children in their schools. This is protecting people in nightclubs. This is protecting police officers that are doing a rally, protecting a peaceful rally in downtown Dallas. So it's not about my gun. It's about what we could prevent if we enforce the law.
You have some innovative programs at Genesis that I would like to hear about. One was trying to introduce some of the folks to responsible men. Tell us some of the other programs that you're really pioneering down.
Well, if I can talk just a little bit about my heroes, the statistics say that 1 out of every 4 women you pass will know domestic violence. That means possibly that 1/4 of every guy you pass is a possible perpetrator of domestic violence. But that also means that 3/4 of men are not. These are genuinely nice fathers and brothers and sons. And so what we recognize is that men need to and should want to be more, the gender should be more than just the problem. That men need to be part of the solution. And they can. In fact, it's extremely powerful when men are involved. When you say, I'm not going to play golf with you because I don't like how you talk to your wife. When you say, I don't laugh at that joke anymore because it's objectifying women, it will stop. I always say everyone expects me to go on and on and on and on about this. But when you stand up and you say, I have zero tolerance, you heard the mayor of Dallas this morning speaking about, real men don't hit women. They're cowards. You can call them a lot of things, but you can't call them a real man. And this has been at the very core of his administration. So with regards to that, we rallied 300 men that are friends of Genesis who come down and mentor our little boys one-on-one who have never seen a gentleman. Every Wednesday night they are at our shelter grilling and shooting baskets with our kiddos. They go into court and sit on the bride's side of the courtroom and let that judge and that victim and that perpetrator and his attorney know that people in this community have zero tolerance for this. So it's been a very successful program for us.
Last question. We have a new mayor in our 2 biggest cities, Tulsa, new mayor in Oklahoma City the last week. We've got an election, primaries coming up in June, going to be an enormous amount of new people at the state legislature. Based upon what's happened in 2017, what's happening in 2018, for public policymakers, what do they need to be doing now to attack domestic violence?
Right. I think we need to look at the laws, and I don't know the laws in Oklahoma, I'm sorry, but we don't take a step backwards. The laws that are in place, we worked real hard to get them there. So, for example, we were talking earlier about strangulation. Strangulation is one of the 11 questions on lethality assessment, that even if he slapped my face today, if he has strangled me in the past, I have a higher chance of dying. And so for us to take a step, it's a felony currently in Oklahoma, to take a step backwards on that is a huge mistake. It's a huge mistake. We have fought too hard to get the laws that we have, and to begin to dismantle them would be a mistake. I know these new elected officials are going to have a lot of things on their plate, but now's the time to ask them, where do you stand? Where do you stand on this issue? And you know what? I'm going to hold you accountable if you get elected. I want you to say in front of the public. I was in a meeting, and one of our representatives up in Washington was at this meeting talking about how, things are good and things are good. And I stood up and asked the question in front of 300 people. It's my understanding that they will be cutting back the budget on protections for not only American women, but Native American women, Alaska Native women. And in front of those 300 people, he had to say, I will not vote for that. Well, you know what? It's of record now. So I think now we ask our elected officials, I think we ask our preachers. I've never heard a sermon out of the pulpit on this issue, and hold them accountable. I think that's just what it's about. It's the communities that are standing together, and that's when it makes a difference. Research shows that a coordinated community response is the best response to end violence against women. And if we start breaking off pieces of my work and your work, it'll never come together. So I would encourage those newly elected officials, or the ones who are still there, to really look seriously at how many crimes are associated with violence against women, with domestic violence. Human trafficking. 99% of women who are prostituted grew up in a violent home. They ran away and were picked up by some pimp because it was not safe to be at home. People who prostitute girls and boys and children, they grew up in a violent home. You look at alcoholism and teen pregnancy and educational systems. There is a study that said that on any given day, 15% of all children in our public school classrooms are living in domestic violence. Another 15 to 20% are not currently, but have in the last year or so. So think about that. 35-40% of all classrooms are being triggered, and they're afraid and they can't do their homework. You can't learn at school when it's not safe to be at home. So then we somehow are surprised that they self-medicate. We're somehow surprised that they look to a role model that is not a positive role model. So I think we can really move the needle on a lot of things if we'll pay attention to violence in the home. Another new really innovative thing that Dallas does. About 5 years ago, the Dallas police brought from the Maryland Network to End Domestic Violence a process called lethality assessment. Now, there are a lot of assessments out there that can predict the risk of a further assault, but this one's different. There are 11 questions that have been proven to show the level of lethality for this victim and the capability of the perpetrator. And so prior to Dallas police adopting this program, a police officer would come out to a house where he had slapped her face. Well, that comes down to a misdemeanor C probably. And if he didn't stay in the house, if he ran out the front door, there isn't even an arrest made. There's a citation written and that's it. So with this new program, the lethality assessment, the police officer understands that I have a slapped face, but then he asks me 11 questions. He says, are there guns in the house, is one. He says, are there children who are not biologically the perpetrators? That's another. Has he ever strangled you? Non-fatal strangulation is a huge, huge indicator of potential lethality. He asked, has he ever threatened to kill you? Do you think he can kill you? Has he threatened suicide? So these 11 questions, if yes to many or any certain questions, will trigger a protocol that the patrol officer gets on a cell phone and says, lady, I think he's fixing to kill you. They dial one of two hotlines, mine being one, Genesis Women's Shelter, 1-800-799-SAFE is the national one, but the local numbers, the local hotlines, will answer these lethality calls, and they are given high priority. Again, and I don't mean disrespectfully just a slap, but that slap on the face triggers this response that can save her life. So we see that they get high priority getting into shelters. We see that they get high priority when it comes to the investigation. Their files are indicate that they are LAP victims. In other words, he has a high potential of lethality. They're making courtrooms safer because they are seeing from this research and from this data and information how dangerous this guy really is. Our courtrooms are safer, our response is better, and I think it saves lives. I actually chair the Dallas County Intimate Partner Fatality Review Committee, and one of the things that we talked about after the first 5 years of studying those women whose lives have been lost in an intimate partner homicide was the fact that not one had ever reached out to a shelter, not one had called a hotline, not one had reached out to the police or had a protective order. And at first I'm thinking, what in the world? I have a director of communications who's communicating all the time, and how do these women, why aren't they coming in? And then all of a sudden we flipped it and we realized that when she does reach out for help, she doesn't die. So this lethality, along with the hotline, along with the, Conference on Crimes Against Women, it all matters. It moves the needle toward saving lives.
Started in Maryland, you say?
The research was done through a grant from the Maryland Network to End Domestic Violence, yes. But you have to apply. Communities have to apply to be one of those safe cities. Dallas is one of the largest, if not the largest one that does that. It becomes part of the domestic violence protocol. You get a lot of grumbles from, one more piece of paper to fill out. But I'm telling you, that piece of paper can save that life.
Just from my background, how do you coordinate? Because I used to be on the CASA board in Oklahoma. Okay, so you've got that going. You were talking about the kids things that dealing with domestic violence, hard to learn. In Oklahoma, we also have real poverty issues, so a lot of them are hungry.
Right.
Okay, you're not learning with that. How do you connect the dots of the different silos? I hate using that term all the time, but there are different groups that are in these silos. How are you connecting all of these so that you're able to trade data and information to be effective across multiple platforms?
Well, and I think that's with regards to the examples that you just gave, I think that's really interesting. You look at a child who doesn't perform well in school because they're hungry, more than likely they are living in a single-parent household. When a woman walks away, when she flees domestic violence, her income drops by something like 70%. 50 to 70%, where we see the perpetrators increase by 35%. His income. I know, right? So we know that financial...
I mean, how much wronger could that be?
How much wronger? I love that. It's pretty wrong. But so if you don't just look at that hungry child in class, why are they hungry? Why are they poor? Mom didn't get an education? Did she start teen dating this guy who was abusive to her in high school, and now she's got 4 kids that she can't provide for? She's got a low-skilled job and thinks no one's there to help her. And so it's all connected. These aren't silos. They're all connected. And again, you go back and make these homes safe, it will make a difference.
You're listening to the new media, the Mitchell Talks Network. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter @MitchellTalks.